At the family dinner, my parents smirked. "Tomorrow, we're moving into your house." "But My name is Sophia Miller. I'm 31 years old. What I'm about to tell you is the story of my family. It's the story of how I learned that love isn't always a given, and that sometimes the only person who can save you is yourself. It's the story of the last family dinner I ever attended. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. The scent of my mother's roast chicken usually felt like home, but tonight it smelled like a trap. The air in my parents' dining room was thick and heavy, the way it always got before an ambush. I sat at the polished wood table, a table I had helped my father sand and varnish one summer when I was 15. He had promised it would be our project, but he'd left after an hour to help my sister Natalie with her art portfolio. I finished it alone. Tonight, my father sat at the head of that table, a king in his worn-out castle. He carved the chicken with a self-satisfied air, the knife scraping against the platter. My mother sat opposite him, watching me with eyes that held no warmth, only calculation. Natalie was next to me, scrolling through her phone, a little giggle escaping her lips every so often. Across from her was her boyfriend Kevin, a man who always looked smug, as if he were in on a joke I hadn't heard yet. They had been dropping hints for weeks, little comments about how my 2-bedroom apartment in the city was too big for one person, questions about my savings that were a little too pointed. Natalie had even joked about which room would be hers. I played dumb. I smiled, passed the mashed potatoes, and said nothing. I let them think I was the same girl who always gave in, the one who always put the family first, the one they could always count on to fix their problems. My father placed a slice of chicken on my plate. He didn't look at me. He looked at my mother, and a small, knowing smirk passed between them. It was a look I knew well. It was the look that came before they asked for something they knew I didn't want to give. He cleared his throat, setting the carving knife down with a loud clatter. The small talk died. Natalie put her phone down. Kevin leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, his own smirk mirroring my father's. The trap was sprung. "Sophia," my father began, his voice full of false authority. "Your mother and I have made a decision." I looked at him, my expression perfectly neutral. I kept my hand steady in my lap. Inside, my heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm, like a drum before a battle. "Things have been tight," he continued, gesturing vaguely with his hand. "This house, the upkeep, it's a lot," my mother chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "And your sister needs a place to focus on her art without worrying about expensive city rent." Natalie gave a little nod, trying to look sympathetic but failing miserably. I waited. I knew the punchline was coming. My father leaned forward, his elbows on the table. The smirk was back, wider this time. It was a look of pure entitlement. "So we've decided it's for the best," he announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Tomorrow we're moving into your house. No excuses." The words hung in the air. Natalie let out a triumphant little giggle. Kevin grinned. My mother looked at me, her expression hardening, daring me to argue. This was it, the final demand, the moment they expected me to fold, to cry, to protest, and then, ultimately, to give in, because that's what I had always done. I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I picked up my fork, took a small bite of chicken, and chewed it slowly. I met my father's gaze. I met my mother's. I glanced at my sister, and I smiled. It was a quiet, calm smile. What they didn't know was that their decision didn't matter. What they didn't know was that I had heard the whispers, I had seen the signs, and I had been planning for this day for months. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they had won. What they didn't know was that I was already 3 steps ahead, and their world was about to come crashing down. To understand why I smiled that night, you have to understand where I grew up. We lived in a small, forgettable town in Ohio, in a 2-story house with blue siding that was always peeling. From the outside, we looked like a perfectly normal family, but inside, our family had its own set of rules, and I learned them early. Rule number 1, Natalie was the treasure. I was the tool. Natalie was 2 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she was treated like a delicate, precious flower. She had bright blonde hair and my mother's blue eyes. She was artistic and dramatic. She was the one my parents showed off. I was quiet, with plain brown hair and my father's serious eyes. I was practical and responsible. I was the one they relied on. Our lives were a perfect picture of this difference. Natalie was enrolled in St. Mary's, a private Catholic school on the other side of town. Her school cost more than my father's monthly mortgage payment. She wore a crisp plaid uniform, shiny new shoes every fall, and carried a leather backpack. I was sent to Northwood Public, the school a few blocks away. I walked there every morning, my books in a faded canvas bag I'd had since middle school. When I once asked my mother why I couldn't go to St. Mary's too, she waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be silly, Sophia," she'd said, not looking up from the dress she was hemming for Natalie. "We can't afford it for both of you. Besides, you're the smart one. You'll be fine anywhere. Natalie needs the extra attention." It was always like that. I was the strong one, the smart one, the responsible one. Those words weren't compliments. They were excuses. They were the reasons I had to carry burdens that Natalie never had to touch. When Natalie turned 16, a brand new red Toyota sat in the driveway with a giant bow on it. My parents threw a huge party in the backyard. All of Natalie's friends from St. Mary's were there, laughing and taking pictures. I spent most of the party in the kitchen, refilling bowls of chips and making sure the drinks were cold. Later that evening, after the party was over, I found my father in the garage, just looking at the car. "It's beautiful, Dad," I said quietly. He jumped, as if he hadn't known I was there. "Oh, Sophia, yeah, it is. Your sister deserves it." I had been working a part-time job at the local library since I was 15. I was saving up for a used car, something old and clunky, just to get to a better job in the next town over. I had about $400 saved. "I'm saving for a car, too," I said, a small flicker of hope in my chest. Maybe he would offer to help, to match what I saved. He just grunted. "That's good. Hard work builds character." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to feel fatherly but felt hollow. "You're the strong one, Sophia. You'll figure it out." I never got that car. A few months later, the property taxes were due, and my parents were short. My mother came to my room, her face a mask of worry. She explained the situation, and then she looked at the small tin box where I kept my savings. I didn't even have to say anything. I just handed it to her. She took it without a word of thanks, as if it were her right. Natalie kept her new red car. I kept walking to my job at the library. My role as the family's walking, breathing safety net became more defined as I got older. While Natalie's biggest concern was which dress to wear to the school dance, I was worried about whether we'd have enough money for groceries at the end of the month. I started tutoring younger kids from my school. I charged $10 an hour. I would sit with them in the library, patiently explaining algebra and grammar. Most of that money didn't go into my savings. It went into the grocery jar my mother kept in the kitchen. One afternoon, I came home from a tutoring session, my pocket full of crumpled bills. I was tired and hungry. Natalie was in the kitchen, complaining to my mother that her favorite brand of organic yogurt was gone. "I told you I needed it for my smoothies, Mom," she whined. My mother sighed dramatically. "I know, sweetie, but it's so expensive. Things are just a little tight this week." I walked over and put the $40 I had just earned on the counter. "Here," I said. "For groceries." My mother's eyes lit up. She scooped up the money immediately. "Oh, thank you, Sophia. You're a lifesaver." She turned to Natalie. "See? Now I can go get your yogurt." Neither of them asked how my day was. Neither of them asked if I was tired. I had just provided the solution to their problem. My purpose was served. I went up to my room and ate a granola bar for dinner. The worst part wasn't the lack of money or things. It was the emotional vacuum. My accomplishments were met with indifference, while Natalie's were celebrated. I won the state-level science fair in 10th grade. I had built a small robot that could solve a Rubik's Cube. I was so proud. I came home with the blue ribbon and the trophy. My father glanced at it and said, "Huh, that's neat." Then he went back to reading the newspaper. That weekend, Natalie had a single drawing displayed at the local library's student art show. My parents bought a new frame for it, invited my aunts and uncles over for a special dinner to celebrate, and talked about her budding talent for weeks. I learned to stop looking for their approval. I learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. If I didn't expect anything, I couldn't be disappointed. I poured everything I had into my schoolwork. It was the one thing that was truly mine. It was my escape plan. Whenever I did try to voice my feelings, to point out the unfairness of it all, I was met with the same tired phrase. I would say, "Why does Natalie get everything?" And my mother would reply, her voice cold and sharp, "Because she needs it. You don't." And my father would add, with that same hollow clap on my shoulder, "Be grateful you're the strong one, Sophia. It's a gift," but it never felt like a gift. It felt like a curse. It was a life sentence of being responsible for everyone else's happiness, while my own was never even considered. They weren't raising a daughter. They were forging a tool, and they expected that tool to be at their service forever. Part 3. The dream sacrificed. By the time I was 18, I had one goal: escape. My ticket out was a full scholarship to the University of Chicago to study architecture. It wasn't just a good school, it was a dream. I had spent countless hours in the library, not just studying, but poring over books on architectural design. I would sketch buildings in the margins of my notebooks. Tall, sleek skyscrapers with walls of glass, and cozy, innovative homes that worked with nature instead of against it. Chicago was the heart of American architecture. It was where I belonged. When the acceptance letter arrived, it was the first time in my life I felt pure, undiluted joy. It was a thick envelope. I held it in my hands, my heart pounding. This piece of paper meant I had done it. I had earned my way out. My hard work, my late nights, my quiet determination. It had all paid off. I ran into the house waving the letter. I got in! I got a full scholarship to Chicago. My mother was in the kitchen on the phone with one of her friends. She put her hand over the receiver. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," she said, her smile tight and forced. She turned back to the phone. Sorry, Carol, just Sophia with some school news. She didn't even ask which school. My father was in the living room watching TV. I showed him the letter. He read it, his eyebrows furrowing. University of Chicago, he said slowly. That's a long way away. And the city is expensive. Even with a scholarship, you'll have costs. It covers tuition, room, and board, I explained, my excitement starting to dim. I've saved enough for books and supplies from my tutoring job. Was all he said, before turning his attention back to the game on the television. Only Natalie seemed to have a strong reaction. She looked at the letter with pure envy. Chicago? Why would you want to go there? It's so gray and boring. That summer, the difference in our worlds was sharper than ever. Natalie was preparing for a 6-week art tour of Europe. She was going to Paris, Rome, and Florence. My parents had taken out a second loan on the house to pay for it. They talked about it constantly. They bought her new luggage, a fancy camera, and a whole new wardrobe. Her trip was treated as a vital investment in her future. My scholarship was treated as a strange and inconvenient hobby. Still, I didn't let their indifference get to me. I was leaving. In 3 months, I would be on a bus to Chicago, to a new life that I had built for myself. I spent that summer working extra hours, saving every dollar. I bought a used drafting table and set it up in my room. I packed my boxes, labeling them with a black marker. Chicago. My new life was becoming real. The blow came a week before I was supposed to leave. I came home from my last day of work at the library. My boxes were stacked by the door. My bus ticket was on my dresser. I felt a nervous excitement bubble up inside me. I was so close. My father was waiting for me at the kitchen table. He had a stack of papers in front of him, and his face was grim. This was not his usual evening routine. He looked tired and much older than his 50 years. Sophia, sit down, he said, his voice heavy. We need to talk. I sat, my stomach twisting into a knot. There's a family emergency, he began, not meeting my eyes. He shuffled the papers. They were bank statements and overdue bills. I made a bad investment a few years ago. I thought I could make it back, but it's all gone bad. The bank is calling. We're behind on the mortgage. I stared at him. What about the loan you took out for Natalie's trip? He flinched. That's different. That was for her education, her future. This scholarship is for my future, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading look I had never seen before. But underneath it, there was something else. Expectation. He already knew what he was going to ask. He expected me to do it. I need your help, Sophia, he said. I need you to stay. I need you to get a full-time job. With your salary and mine, we can catch up on the payments. Just for a year. That's all I'm asking. 1 year, the room felt like it was tilting. My dream, my meticulously planned escape, was dissolving right in front of me. A year? I repeated, my voice hollow. Dad, the scholarship is for this fall. I can't defer it. If I don't go now, I lose it. You can apply again next year, he said quickly, waving his hand as if it were a minor detail. You're smart. You'll get another one. You don't know that, I said, tears welling in my eyes. This was a full ride. That doesn't just happen every day. This is when my mother walked in. She must have been listening from the other room. She came and stood behind my father, placing her hands on his shoulders, a united front. Sophia, your father is under a lot of stress, she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. You're being selfish. Family has to come first. We have always provided for you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to list every sacrifice, every dollar I'd earned for their groceries, every lonely hour I'd spent being the strong one, but I knew it wouldn't matter. In their story, they were the generous parents, and I was the ungrateful child. What about Natalie? I asked, my voice cracking. Is she coming home? Is she getting a job? My father looked down at the table, ashamed. My mother's spine stiffened. Don't you dare bring your sister into this, she snapped. Her trip is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's for her art portfolio. We are not going to ruin her future because of a few financial mistakes. And there it was. Her future mattered. Mine did not. My once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was just an inconvenience. They didn't yell. They didn't have to. They just sat there, the full weight of their expectation pressing down on me. They were my parents. I was their daughter. This was my duty. I was the strong one. I was the one who had to fix things. I looked from my father's desperate face to my mother's cold, demanding one. I thought about Chicago. I thought about the glass towers and the life I was supposed to have. It felt like a movie I had watched about someone else. I felt something break inside me that night. It was the last fragile piece of hope I had that they might one day see me. That they might one day put me first. Okay, I whispered. The word felt like broken glass in my throat. I'll stay. My father let out a huge sigh of relief, the tension draining from his shoulders. Thank you, Sophia. I knew I could count on you. My mother nodded, a thin, satisfied smile on her lips. You're doing the right thing. The next morning, I made the call. I told the University of Chicago that I would not be attending. The woman on the other end was kind. She said she was sorry to hear that. After I hung up, I walked to my room and began to unpack my boxes. Each folded shirt, each carefully wrapped book felt like a stone on my heart. 2 days later, we got a postcard from Natalie. It was a picture of the Eiffel Tower. On the back, she had written, "Paris is amazing. Wish you were here." Not really, haha. Love, Nat. My parents put the postcard on the refrigerator. They looked at it and smiled. I started my new full-time job at a call center the following Monday. My dreams were crushed, packed away in boxes, and hidden in the back of my closet. The year my father promised turned into 2, then 5, then 10. The family's financial emergency never seemed to end. It was a moving target, a bottomless pit that I was expected to fill. My life in Ohio became a monotonous cycle of work and responsibility. I never did reapply for college. The dream of architecture felt too painful to even think about, like probing a wound that wouldn't heal. I kept the job at the call center for 2 years. It was soul-crushing work, listening to angry people complain all day. Every 2 weeks, I would sign my paycheck over to my father. He would take what he needed for the mortgage and bills, and give me a small allowance for gas and personal items. It was never enough. Natalie, meanwhile, had returned from Europe full of ideas, but with no intention of getting a job. She decided she was going to be a professional artist. My parents converted the guest room into a studio for her. They paid for her canvases, her expensive paints, and her pottery classes. My paycheck was funding her dream while mine gathered dust. I knew I couldn't stay at the call center. The despair was eating me alive. I needed a new plan. So, I started building a new life in the shadows of my old one. I quit the call center and took 2 different jobs. From 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, I was part of a cleaning crew for a downtown office building. The work was hard and lonely, but it was quiet. I could put in my headphones and just disappear. Then, from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, I worked as a receptionist at a doctor's office. I slept for a few hours in between, my body aching with exhaustion. I was living like a ghost, but for the first time I had some control. I gave my parents a fixed amount of money every month, enough to cover my share of the bills and then some. The rest I hid. I opened a separate bank account they didn't know about. Every week I would deposit small amounts of cash. $20 here, $50 there. It was a slow, painstaking process. While I was scrubbing floors and scheduling appointments, I was also studying. In the dead of night, after my cleaning shift, I would sit in my car in the empty office parking lot, using their free Wi-Fi. I enrolled in online courses for IT certifications. I studied coding, network security, and database management. The glowing laptop screen in my dark car became my classroom, my university, my path out. My family barely noticed the change. To them, I was just Sophia, the reliable daughter who went to her jobs and paid her bills. They never asked what I did on my cleaning shift. They never asked why I was always so tired. They only called me when they needed something. My mother would call me at the doctor's office. "Sophia, the dishwasher is making a funny noise. Can you look at it when you get home?" My father would call when a light bulb went out or his computer was running slow. I was the family's live-in mechanic, IT support, and financial backup plan. Natalie, meanwhile, was racking up debt. She had a string of failed art projects and a growing credit card bill from buying supplies and clothes she couldn't afford. She treated my income as a shared resource. One afternoon, I came home to find her in my room, holding a dress of mine. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, not a hint of shame in her voice. "Can I borrow this? I have a date. I kind of need it for a job interview tomorrow, Nat," I said. She pouted. "Oh, come on. It's just one night. You have other clothes." She didn't wait for an answer, just walked out with my dress. The interview was for an entry-level tech consulting position at a small firm in the city. It was the job I had been studying for years. I had to wear a different outfit, one that wasn't as professional. I didn't get the job. When I told Natalie, she just shrugged. "Whatever. It's not like you need more money." But I did. I needed my own money. I needed my own life. That rejection was a fire under me. I studied harder. I took more certification exams. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I saved every single dime I could. My secret bank account grew, slowly but steadily. It was my freedom fund. My parents' obliviousness was a shield. Because they never paid close attention to me, they never saw my ambition. They never saw the person I was becoming. They just saw the function I served. I remember one evening, my father was trying to fix our ancient router. He was getting frustrated, cursing under his breath. I walked over, typed a few commands into his laptop, and reset the connection. It was working again in seconds. He stared at the screen, then at me. "How did you do that?" "I've been studying network systems online," I told him. He just grunted. "Well, that's useful. Cheaper than calling a repairman." He didn't see a daughter with a valuable new skill set. He saw a way to save $100. That was the moment I fully understood. They would never see me as a person with my own dreams and goals. I would always be just a solution to their problems, a backup plan for when things went wrong. Living that way was incredibly lonely. I had no real friends. I had no time to date. My life was a closed loop of work, study, and saving. But with every dollar I saved, with every certification I earned, I was buying a piece of my freedom. I was building a fortress around myself, brick by brick, and I knew that one day I would be strong enough to close the gate and not let them in. By the time I turned 30, I had clawed my way into a respectable career. I had left the cleaning crew and the receptionist desk far behind. I was a freelance tech consultant, and I was good at it. I helped small businesses streamline their data, secure their networks, and build efficient systems. I worked from a tiny apartment I finally rented for myself in the city, an hour away from my parents' house. It was my sanctuary. It was the first space in my entire life that was completely mine. I still sent my parents money every month. The family emergency had become a permanent state of being, but now it was on my terms. I sent a set amount by direct deposit. I didn't answer late-night calls for extra cash. I was slowly, carefully building boundaries. They complained, of course. They said I was being distant, that I wasn't as helpful as I used to be. I ignored them. I was too busy building my future. The idea for my own company came from my work. I noticed that many small healthcare clinics, dentists, physical therapists, local doctors were using outdated, clunky software to manage their patient records and appointments. It was inefficient and insecure. I saw a gap in the market. I imagined a simple, secure, cloud-based platform that was affordable for small practices, a system that could help them be more efficient, so they could spend more time with their patients. I started sketching out the idea in a notebook during my free time. It was the first time since high school that I had felt that creative spark, the same feeling I used to get when I designed buildings. This time, I wasn't designing a physical structure. I was designing a system to help people. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed a partner, someone who knew the business side of things. I found him at a local tech meetup. His name was Mark. He was a few years older than me, with a sharp mind for business and a calm, steady presence that immediately put me at ease. I nervously told him my idea over coffee. His eyes lit up. He saw the potential immediately. And so, Healthy, our small health tech startup, was born. The next year was a blur of long nights, endless coffee, and quiet, focused work. We rented a tiny, windowless office space that we could barely afford. We were the only 2 employees. I was the chief architect of the system, writing thousands of lines of code, designing the user interface, and running endless tests. Mark handled the business plan, the marketing strategy, and started reaching out to potential investors. It was the hardest I had ever worked in my life. I was exhausted, stressed, and constantly worried about money, but it was a different kind of tired than when I was cleaning offices. This was a hopeful exhaustion. I was building something from nothing, something that was entirely mine. Mark was the first person in my life who saw me as an equal. He respected my skills and valued my opinion. He never called me the strong one. He called me his partner. There were many times we almost failed. We ran out of money twice. We were rejected by over a dozen investors. Many of them were condescending men in suits who looked at me and clearly wondered what a woman knew about tech. I would go home to my small apartment, my heart heavy with doubt, and wonder if I had made a huge mistake. But then I would think of my family. I would think of the sacrificed scholarship, the years of being their backup plan. I would think of Natalie, who was still living at home, calling herself a freelance artist, but mostly just spending my parents' money. That anger, that deep well of injustice I had carried for so long, became my fuel. I refused to fail. I would not go back to being their tool. The breakthrough came during a pitch to a venture capital firm run by a woman who had started her own tech company. She listened to our presentation intently. She didn't interrupt. She asked sharp, insightful questions. She looked at me, really looked at me, and saw a founder, not just a female coder. A week later, she called. They were in. They were backing our project. I remember sitting in our tiny office with Mark after we got the news. He was ecstatic, already planning our next steps. I was just quiet. I held the signed investment letter in my hands. It represented more than just money. It was validation. It was proof that I was more than what my family had made me. It was a key to a future they couldn't control. That night, I went back to my apartment. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my sofa in the dark, looking out at the city lights. For the first time, I felt a sense of ownership, not just of a company, but of my own life. I had built this. Me, the invisible daughter, the backup plan, the strong one. And in that quiet, dark apartment, I made a solemn vow to myself. This success was mine. The company, the money, the future it would bring, it all belonged to me. I had paid for it with my own sweat, my own tears, and my own sacrificed dreams. And I swore to myself, with every fiber of my being, that my family would never, ever touch it. The success of Healthy was a quiet revolution in my life. On the outside, I was a co-founder, a tech developer, a professional. I attended meetings, managed projects, and earned a respect I had never known. But on the inside, the change was even more profound. The fear that had lived in my bones for so long, the fear of my family's next demand, the dread of their next manufactured crisis, was beginning to be replaced by a fragile sense of security. I had built something they couldn't understand, and therefore couldn't easily take. Or so I thought. My contact with them had dwindled to a carefully managed minimum. I still sent the monthly payment, a sum I now considered less a family obligation and more a tax for my peace. In return, I expected to be left alone. For a while, it worked. Their calls became less frequent. Their demands softened into passive-aggressive hints that I mostly ignored. I allowed myself to believe that perhaps they had finally accepted my independence. I was wrong. They weren't accepting it. They were waiting for it to grow into something worth harvesting. The warning came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was at my apartment, working late on a new module for our software, when my phone rang. It was my Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister. She was the only member of my extended family who had ever shown me any genuine kindness. She was a quiet woman, often steamrolled by my mother's louder personality, but she had a good heart. We didn't talk often, so a call from her was unusual. "Sophia? Honey, is this a bad time?" she asked, her voice a nervous whisper. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "No, Aunt Linda, not at all. Is everything okay?" I leaned back in my chair, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I don't know if I should be calling," she stammered. "Your mother would kill me if she knew. But I can't. It just doesn't feel right." "What is it?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the anxiety that was now creeping up my spine. She took a deep breath. "I was over at their house for dinner on Sunday, and, well, they're talking, Sophia. They're talking a lot about you. Good things, I hope," I said, the irony tasting like acid on my tongue. Aunt Linda let out a short, bitter laugh. "Not exactly. They're in trouble, honey. Bad trouble. Your father, he lost a lot of money on another one of his sure things. They're months behind on the mortgage again. They're talking about foreclosure." I closed my eyes. It was the same old story. The same black hole of their irresponsibility. But this time, I was no longer in the house with them. I was an hour away. I had my own life. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "That's not the part you need to hear," she said, her voice dropping lower. "They're not looking for a way to fix it. They're not talking about downsizing or getting second jobs. They have a different plan. Their plan is you." The cold dread I felt was grimly familiar. "What do you mean their plan is me?" "They're telling people they're going to be moving in with you," she said, the words rushing out in a torrent. "Not asking, Sophia, telling. Your mother told Carol from next door that they were going to be staying with Sophia in the city for a while to help her out. And Natalie, she's the worst. She was showing her friends photos of your apartment from the real estate website. She's already picked out which bedroom will be hers. She was bragging, Sophia, bragging that she'd finally have a place downtown, and that you would be happy to have them." I felt the air leave my lungs. My beautiful, peaceful apartment, my sanctuary. They were talking about it like it was a property they already owned. They had already divided it up, assigned rooms, and moved in inside their heads. The violation of it was staggering. "They haven't said a word to me," I whispered. "I know, honey. That's why I had to call. They're planning to ambush you. They think you'll just roll over and accept it like you always have. Your father said you owe it to them." I thanked her, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. I told her I appreciated the warning and that I was grateful. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, the rain streaking down my apartment window. The anger I felt was cold and hard, like a block of ice forming in my chest. It wasn't the hot, helpless anger of my youth. It was the focused, clear-eyed anger of an adult who was about to be wronged and who had the power to stop it. My aunt's warning was the first shot. The final confirmation came a few days later. I had left a box of old college textbooks, the ones from my online courses, in the attic of my parents' house. I needed one for a work project and decided to swing by unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon. I figured they'd be out shopping. I used my old key to let myself in. The house was quiet. I was about to call out, but then I heard my father's voice coming from the den. He was on the phone. His voice was low and conspiratorial, but the den door was slightly ajar, and the sound carried. I froze in the hallway. No, she won't say no," he was saying. "She'll make a fuss, probably cry a little, but she'll do it. She always does. It's her duty." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "What do you mean? What if she has her own life?" My father scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "I gave her that life. We sacrificed for her. Who paid for her food? Who put a roof over her head? She owes us. We made her who she is. It's time she pays up." Another pause. "The money she's making from that little computer thing she does? That should have been our money to begin with. She's got that big fancy apartment all to herself. It's a waste. It's family property. We're just going to claim what's ours." Natalie is excited. It'll be good for her to be in the city, around more culture. Sophia can help support her art. I stood in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob, my body rigid. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the last microscopic piece of my heart that still held out hope for them. It's family property. She owes us. We made her. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a stock they had invested in, one that was finally mature and ready to be cashed out. My success wasn't my own. It was a resource they were entitled to. My home wasn't my sanctuary. It was a property they had a right to occupy. I didn't go in. I didn't get my book. I backed away from the door as quiet as a thief. I slipped out of the house, closing the front door so softly it didn't even click. I sat in my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The ice in my chest had solidified. It was no longer just anger. It was resolve. They thought I was the same girl who had unpacked her boxes to Chicago and gone to work at a call center. They thought I was the same tool they had forged, ready to be picked up and used whenever they saw fit. They were about to find out how much I had changed. They had started a war. I was going to finish it. My first call on Monday morning would not be to my parents. It would be to a lawyer. Monday morning, I was sitting in a sleek, minimalist office on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view of the city was panoramic, a world away from the peeling blue siding of my childhood home. Across a large glass desk sat a woman named Evelyn Reed. She was a senior partner at a firm that specialized in asset protection and corporate law. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found instantly reassuring. I had spent the entire weekend preparing for this meeting. I laid out my situation for her, not with emotion, but with facts. I told her about my family's history of financial dependency, my sister's entitlement, and the recent threats I had learned of. I told her about the startup, my equity shares, my apartment, and my savings. I concluded by telling her what my father had said. It's family property. We're just going to claim what's ours. Evelyn listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. When I finished, she nodded slowly. This is not a family drama, Ms. Miller, she said, her voice crisp and clear. This is an asset allocation problem, and we can solve it. The way she framed it, coolly, logically, was exactly what I needed. She wasn't offering sympathy, she was offering a strategy. She laid out a plan that was both audacious and brilliant. It was a plan to make myself financially invisible. A plan to build a fortress so high and so strong that my family would never be able to breach its walls. Your biggest vulnerability is your ownership, she explained. You own valuable equity in a rising company. You own a desirable piece of real estate. On paper, you are a target. We need to change what the paper says. The first step was the most difficult. My shares in Healthy were my proudest achievement. They were the tangible proof of my success. Evelyn's advice was radical. Sell a significant portion of them. Right now, the company is privately held, she said. Your shares have a certain valuation, but it's not liquid. We need to convert that potential into cash. Cash is movable. Cash is protectable. The thought of selling part of my company felt like a betrayal, but the thought of my family getting their hands on it felt infinitely worse. I called Mark and asked him to meet me for lunch. I explained the situation. I didn't give him all the painful family details, just that I needed to restructure my personal finances for security reasons and required liquidity. He was my partner and he trusted me. He saw the grim determination in my eyes and didn't push for details. Whatever you need, Sophia, he said, his support unwavering. This is your company as much as it is mine. We'll find a way to make it work. We engaged a private equity firm that had shown interest in us before. After 2 weeks of intense negotiations, we reached a deal. I sold a portion of my shares for a pre-tax sum of $750,000. The number was staggering. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. The day the wire transfer hit my business account, my hands were shaking. This was the money my father thought he was entitled to. The second step of Evelyn's plan went into immediate effect. Before the money could even settle, she had me open a new set of accounts. The largest portion of the funds was transferred into an irrevocable trust. Evelyn was the trustee. The trust was a complex legal entity with its own tax ID number. My name was listed as the beneficiary, but I had no direct control over the funds. I could receive distributions, but I didn't technically own the money anymore. The trust did. It was a legal shield, designed to be untouchable in any personal dispute. My parents could sue me, but they couldn't sue the trust. The third step was for the apartment, my sanctuary. Giving it to the trust is one option, Evelyn said, but a better one is to create another layer of separation. She had her team draw up the paperwork for a shell corporation, a limited liability company with a generic name, Midwest Property Holdings, LLC. The trust was the sole owner of the LLC. Then, I sold my apartment to the LLC for a nominal fee. On paper, my home was now a corporate asset. The final piece of the puzzle was a lease agreement. The LLC, as the owner, leased the apartment back to me. I was now officially a tenant in the home I owned. I paid my rent to the LLC every month, which then went back to the trust. It was a dizzying shuffle of legal documents, signatures, and wire transfers. It felt like I was dismantling my life and reassembling it into a complex, impenetrable machine. I closed the bank accounts my family knew about, leaving only my primary checking account with a modest, believable balance. When it was all done, I sat in Evelyn's office again. She slid a folder across the desk to me. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the LLC formation, the deed transfer, and my new lease. "As of this moment," she said, "you are a woman of average means. You have a good job, a reasonable salary, and you rent an apartment you can comfortably afford. You have no significant savings and no major assets to your name. You are, for all intents and purposes, no longer the solution to anyone's financial problems." I walked out of her office and into the bustling city street. I felt strangely light. For my entire life, my value to my family had been tied to what I could provide. I had just successfully and legally erased that value. They were coming for a feast, but I had cleared the table and locked the pantry. The only thing left to do was wait for them to arrive for a dinner that no longer existed. The summons came a week later. It was a call from my mother, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Sophia, honey, we haven't seen you in ages. We're having a special family dinner on Sunday. Roast chicken. Your favorite. You have to come." It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in the flimsy packaging of a family meal. I knew exactly what this was. This was the ambush Aunt Linda had warned me about. This was the moment they planned to lower the boom, to announce my new involuntary roommates. For a brief second I considered saying no, simply refusing to walk into the lion's den. But then I thought of the fortress I had built. A fortress is useless if it's never tested. "I'll be there," I said, my voice calm and even. On Sunday evening, I took my time getting ready. I chose my outfit carefully, not for beauty but for power. A simple, well-tailored black dress, low heels, and minimal jewelry. It was the kind of armor one wears to a business negotiation, not a family dinner. As I drove to their house, I felt no fear. The nervous, accommodating girl who used to live in that house was gone. In her place was a woman who had a lawyer on retainer and a multi-layered asset protection plan. I rehearsed my lines in my head. They were simple, factual, and devastating. I walked in to find the whole cast assembled. My father, beaming with a false paternal warmth. My mother, bustling around the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune. And Natalie, along with her vapid boyfriend Kevin, lounging on the sofa as if they were already lords of the manor. They greeted me with an over-the-top enthusiasm that was completely transparent. This was the welcome they gave to the golden goose, right before they planned to pluck it. We sat down at the dinner table, the same one I had finished sanding by myself all those years ago. The meal was a performance of happy family life. They asked about my work, but their eyes glazed over when I started to talk about software development. They weren't interested in the details of my life, only in the fruits of it. Finally, as my father set down the carving knife, he cleared his throat and assumed the same smug, authoritative expression I had seen in my nightmares for weeks. This was it. The moment from The Hook, replaying now in slow, excruciating detail. He and my mother exchanged their silent, conspiratorial smirk. "Sophia," he began, leaning forward. "As you know, things have been a bit of a struggle for us lately. Your mother and I aren't getting any younger. And this house is just so much to keep up," my mother added, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a napkin. A perfect imitation of a damsel in distress. Natalie chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We've all been so worried about you too, Sophia. All alone in that big apartment. It's not good for you." I just watched them, letting them play out their ridiculous pre-rehearsed script. Kevin leaned back, grinning, ready for the grand finale. My father took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. "So we've made a decision. It's what's best for the entire family," he announced, his voice filled with a sense of magnanimous authority. "Tomorrow we're moving into your house. We'll take the master bedroom, of course. And Natalie and Kevin can have the second bedroom. It's all settled. No excuses." He said it. The words I knew were coming. He smiled, expecting my protest, my tears, and my eventual defeated acceptance. My mother watched me, her expression a mixture of pity and steel. Natalie giggled, already imagining herself living the high life in the city, funded by me. I placed my fork and knife neatly on my plate. I took a slow sip of water. I looked each of them in the eye, one by one. And then I delivered my line. "I'm afraid that's not possible," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly level. My father's smile faltered. "What do you mean, not possible?" I just said, "It's settled." "Well, you can't move into a house that I don't own," I replied simply. The silence that fell over the table was immediate and absolute. It was as if I had sucked all the air out of the room. My mother was the first to find her voice. "What are you talking about, Sophia? Don't be ridiculous. Of course you own it." "Actually, no." "I don't," I said, maintaining my serene calm. "I had to sell it. Things have been tight for me, too." I let that little lie hang in the air, a perfect mirror of their own excuses. Natalie's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "You sold it? You sold my apartment? Without even telling us?" "It was never your apartment, Natalie," I said, my voice still quiet. "And it wasn't a decision I made lightly. But it's done." My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "You're lying. You're doing this just to be selfish. Just to spite us." "I'm not lying," I said. And then I delivered the killing blow. I looked him straight in the eye. But if you're still interested in the property, I could put you in touch with the new owners. They're a holding company. I'm sure they'd be willing to sell. All you'd need is the cash. The last valuation was about $750,000. The number hit the table like a grenade. $750,000. It was an impossible astronomical sum to them. It was the sound of a door slamming shut in their faces, a door they never even knew existed. My mother turned pale. Kevin looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Natalie finally exploded. "I hate you!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. "You've always been like this. Selfish and cold. You had everything, and you couldn't even share it with your own family." I stood up from the table. The performance was over. "No, Natalie," I said, my voice no longer calm, but filled with a decade of suppressed truth. "I had nothing. I had the leftovers. I had the responsibilities. I had the burdens while you had the opportunities. I didn't have everything. I built everything. With no help from any of you." I looked at my parents, at their stunned, defeated faces. "You were right about one thing, Dad," I said. "It is your duty to provide a roof over your family's head. Your family, not mine." I placed my napkin on the table. "Thank you for dinner." And with that, I turned around and walked out of the house. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked away with the steady, even steps of a woman who had finally and completely won her freedom. The explosion from that dinner was not a single event. It was a series of aftershocks that rippled out for weeks. I had expected them to be angry, but I had underestimated the sheer ferocity of their entitlement. They didn't retreat to lick their wounds. They launched an all-out assault. Their first weapon was public shame. My mother took to Facebook, posting vague, tear-soaked statuses about the pain of being abandoned by an ungrateful child in her time of need. She wrote about family values and how some children forget where they came from. Friends and distant relatives who only knew the curated version of our family flooded her with sympathy. "So sorry you're going through this. Some kids are just selfish. You're in our prayers." Natalie was more direct. She posted a long, rambling tirade on her own page, calling me a liar and a monster. She claimed I was hoarding millions of dollars and had thrown my own family out on the street for no reason. She painted me as a cold, calculating dragon sitting on a pile of gold. It was a distorted funhouse mirror version of the truth. A few of her friends chimed in, calling me names I won't repeat. Aunt Linda called me, distraught. "They're making you sound horrible, Sophia. You have to defend yourself. Tell people the truth." "The people who matter already know the truth," I told her, my voice weary. "And the people who believe them don't matter." It was the first real test of my new resolve. The old Sophia would have been mortified. She would have called them, crying, begging them to stop. She would have tried to explain, to justify herself. The new Sophia simply hit the block button. I unfriended Natalie. I unfollowed my mother. I built a digital wall to match the legal one I had already constructed. I refused to engage. My silence was a better defense than any argument. Their next move was escalation. When the public shaming didn't result in a tearful apology and a blank check from me, they decided to confront me directly. They showed up at the Healthy office. I was in a meeting with Mark and our development team when my receptionist buzzed my desk phone. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Your family is here, in the lobby. They're demanding to see you, and they're making a scene." Mark saw the look on my face and immediately stood up. "I'll handle this." "No," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "I will." I walked out to the lobby. It was worse than I imagined. My father was red-faced, yelling at the poor receptionist. My mother was sobbing loudly into a handkerchief. Natalie was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. A few employees had poked their heads out of their offices to see what the commotion was about. The moment they saw me, they all converged. "There you are," my father bellowed. "You are going to come with us right now and fix this. You will go to the bank and you will give us the money you owe us." "Sophia, how could you do this to us?" my mother wailed. "We have nowhere to go. We're going to be homeless." I stood there, calm and still, refusing to be drawn into their chaos. "This is my place of work," I said, my voice low but carrying in the suddenly silent lobby. "This is not the place for this conversation. You need to leave. We're not leaving until you listen to us," Natalie screamed. I looked past them, making eye contact with the building's security guard who was now hovering nearby. I gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He understood immediately. He and another guard stepped forward. "Sir, ma'am, you're going to have to leave the premises," the first guard said in a firm, official tone. The sight of the uniforms finally seemed to penetrate my father's rage. His face went from red to a pasty white. My mother's sobs turned into horrified gasps. They had wanted to humiliate me in my professional space. Instead, they had profoundly humiliated themselves. The security guards escorted them out of the building, a trio of sputtering, defeated tyrants. Mark came and stood beside me, watching them go. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. "I think I am. That was the last time I saw them in person." After that, The consequences of their own choices finally caught up to them, with no one left to bail them out. I learned from Aunt Linda that the bank had officially foreclosed on the house. They had 2 months to vacate. Kevin, Natalie's smug boyfriend, disappeared the moment he realized the downtown apartment and the lifestyle he imagined with it was never going to happen. Natalie's angry social media posts turned into desperate ones, trying to sell her art to pay for moving expenses. The desperate calls and voicemails started flooding my phone again. My mother crying, my father demanding, Natalie begging. I listened to the first few seconds of one voicemail from my mother. "Sophia, please, I'm begging you. Don't let them take our home. Just a loan. We'll pay you back, I swear." I felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a deep, sorrowful pity for the woman she had become. But it wasn't my responsibility to save her. It never had been. I deleted the voicemails without listening to the end. I blocked their numbers. I let the calls go unanswered. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. Every instinct from my childhood screamed at me to fix it, to be the strong one, to rush in and solve their problems. But I knew if I did, the cycle would never end. This time they had to face the fallout alone. I did not rescue them. I closed the bank. I let them fall. And in doing so, I finally saved myself. A year later, the noise had finally faded. The angry voicemails stopped. The social media attacks ceased. There was just silence. A quiet, peaceful silence I had never known. I sold the last of my things in Ohio and made the move I had dreamed of for so long. Not to Chicago, the city of my lost architectural dreams, but to a place that felt new and untainted, Seattle. I bought a small house on the edge of the city, nestled among tall pine trees, with a view of the water in the distance. It wasn't a large or impressive house. It didn't have a second bedroom for unwanted guests. It had a small garden in the back and a large picture window in the living room. It was a house built for one person to find peace in. It was perfect. Healthy had grown, and my role had shifted. I was less of a coder and more of a strategist now. Mark and I launched a new wellness app, a side project that had become a passion. It was designed to help people manage stress through guided meditations and mindfulness exercises. It felt fitting. I was building a tool to help others find the kind of peace I had fought so hard to secure for myself. My life was filled with a new kind of family. Mark and his wife, our small team of dedicated employees, a few neighbors who would bring me fresh vegetables from their garden. We'd have barbecues in my backyard. There was easy laughter and genuine affection. They valued me for my ideas, my kindness, and my terrible jokes, not for my bank account. They were my found family, and their love was unconditional, a concept I was only just beginning to understand. I rarely thought about my parents or Natalie. Aunt Linda would give me brief, reluctant updates. They were living in a cramped rental apartment an hour out of town. My father was working part-time at a hardware store. My mother had taken a job as a cashier. Natalie was a waitress. They were surviving, but just barely. Their grand plans had crumbled into a mundane, difficult reality. I felt no joy in their struggle, no sense of revenge. I just felt a profound, aching sadness for the family we could have been, and a quiet, solid relief for the person I had become in their absence. One evening, I was sitting by my picture window, sipping a cup of tea and watching the sunset over the Puget Sound. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace so deep and so complete it almost made me want to cry. I had done it. I was free. I thought about the word forgiveness. I had always imagined it as a grand gesture, a tearful reunion where apologies were made and hurts were healed. But sitting there, I realized that wasn't what forgiveness was for me. I couldn't erase what they had done. I couldn't forget the years of being treated as a tool, or the crushing weight of having my dreams sacrificed for theirs. Reconciling with them would mean letting them back into my life, and that was a price I was no longer willing to pay. My forgiveness was something quieter. It was for me, not for them. It was the act of letting go of the anger and the bitterness that had been my fuel for so long. It was accepting that they were who they were, and that I could not change them. It was understanding that their inability to love me properly was their failure, not mine. Forgiveness didn't mean access. It didn't mean I had to answer the phone if they called. It didn't mean I had to open my door if they knocked. My forgiveness was a private internal release. It was me, finally putting down the heavy burden of their baggage, and walking away, not in anger, but in peace. My house was quiet. My heart was calm. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. Peace, I realized, wasn't something you were given. It was something you built, something you defended, and something you claimed for yourself. And this peace was mine now. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.